The alarm went off at 5:15. Daniel Carter reached across the nightstand, silenced it, and lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom he rented in a 3-story walk-up on the east side of Seattle. Rain was already hitting the window, not the soft, misty drizzle the Pacific Northwest was known for. This was real October rain, the kind that came sideways and found the gaps in everything. He got up anyway. The apartment was small enough that 4 steps got him from the bedroom to the kitchen. He started the coffee and stood at the counter in his undershirt and socks, listening to the building groan around him in the wind. Upstairs, the Morrisons were already moving. Below, someone's television murmured through the floor. He was used to all of it by now. 8 months in this place, and he'd learned the rhythms of the building the way you learn the sounds of a body you've lived inside for years. He poured a mug, sat at the 2-person table that took up most of the kitchen, and opened his laptop. The job listing was still there, bookmarked at the top of his browser. North Star Systems. Senior Analyst, Infrastructure Division. Salary range: $88,000 to $104,000 annually, commensurate with experience. Benefits: full medical, dental, vision, 401, with company match. He'd read it so many times the words had started to blur. He closed the laptop. In the 8 months since the layoff at his previous firm, a mid-sized data management company that had quietly folded 3 divisions before the fiscal year ended, Daniel had applied to 41 positions. He'd heard back from 6. Of those, he'd moved past the first round of screening in 3. 2 had gone quiet after the second interview. 1 had sent a rejection email that addressed him as Dear Applicant, which had struck him, at the time, as almost admirably impersonal. Today was his last interview. Not because he'd stopped applying, he had 2 others still pending, but because this was the one that felt real. Northstar was the largest private tech employer in the region, the kind of company that had a gym on the 4th floor and an HR department with an actual budget. If he got this job, Lily could stay in her school. He could stop calculating how many weeks of groceries were left in the savings account. He finished his coffee and went to check on her. Lily was 7 years old and sleeping in the way that only 7-year-olds could sleep, which was completely. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like she was posing for a photograph. He stood in the doorway and watched her chest rise and fall. She had her mother's nose, her mother's way of curling her fingers slightly inward, even when she was unconscious. Rachel had been gone for 3 years, now a cardiac arrhythmia, sudden and utterly without warning, on a Thursday afternoon in March, and Daniel had been watching his daughter's face for 3 years for evidence of the woman he had lost. He found it every morning. He backed out of the room without waking her. Mrs. Patricia Holloway from down the hall 64, retired, fiercely competent, and enormously kind, would come by at 7:30 to walk Lily to school. It was an arrangement they'd settled into over the last 5 months, and Daniel had tried to compensate her in small ways. Groceries, sometimes, a good bottle of wine at Christmas, the kind of irregular, oblique payment that allowed both of them to pretend it wasn't payment. He showered, dressed in the suit. It was the charcoal one, 3 years old, still respectable. He'd had it dry cleaned the week before. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror and adjusted the collar of his white shirt and reminded himself of everything he'd been telling himself for the past 2 weeks. He was qualified for this job. He had 8 years of relevant experience. He knew the systems they used. He had prepared. He went back to Lily's room. He didn't go in, just stood at the crack of the door. But as he turned to leave, he noticed the folded piece of paper on the kitchen table that he hadn't seen before. He picked it up. It was torn from the back of a coloring book. Written in purple crayon, in the large, careful letters of a child who had recently mastered writing. "Good luck, Daddy. You can do it." He folded it and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, directly over his chest. Then he picked up his keys and walked out into the rain. The drive from his apartment to the Northstar campus was supposed to take 22 minutes on a clear morning. This was not a clear morning. The rain had turned the city into a slow-moving obstacle. His wipers worked at full speed and still barely kept pace with the water sheeting down the windshield. He sat in the left lane of the I-5 on-ramp and watched the brake lights ahead of him bloom red in the gray light, and breathed steadily through his nose, the way he'd taught himself to do when his chest started to tighten. The interview was at 9 o'clock. It was currently 8:16. He had given himself 45 minutes, which was 23 more than he needed. He had told himself that if he arrived early, he could sit in the parking garage for 15 minutes, review his notes, compose himself. He had a folder on the passenger seat with printed copies of his resume, a list of references, and 3 pages of handwritten preparation notes that he'd gone over 3 times the night before while Lily did her homework at the same table. He thought about the bills. It was an involuntary habit, like touching your tongue to a sore tooth. The rent was $1,250 a month. He'd paid October on time, but only because he'd borrowed $200 from his brother in Tacoma, and he hadn't told Marcus about that, and the guilt of it sat in his stomach every time he thought about it. The electricity was $98, past due. The internet was $54. Lily's after-school program was $160, due the 15th. He had $412 in checking. The traffic eased slightly as he passed the convention center and merged onto the downtown connector. He exhaled. North Star Systems occupied a glass and steel building on the south end of the tech corridor, the kind of building that looked, from the outside, like it had been designed by someone who'd never had to worry about money. He'd driven past it twice in the past year, once after dropping Lily at a birthday party nearby. Once, for no particular reason at all, just to look, to remind himself it was real, that it was a place where people went every morning and did work and came home to their families with health insurance and 401 contributions. He wanted to be one of those people. 8 minutes later, he was on Aurora Avenue, 2 miles from the North Star campus. He had 32 minutes. That was when he saw her. The SUV was pulled over on the right shoulder, hazards blinking orange against the gray morning. It was a dark green Volvo late model, clearly expensive, and the right front tire was flat, the rim sitting visibly lower than the others. Standing beside the open driver's door, one hand braced against the roof of the car, was a woman. She was very pregnant. Daniel noticed all of this in the 1.5 it took him to pass the vehicle. He saw the hazard lights, the flattened tire, the woman's posture, one hand on the roof, other arm wrapped around her midsection, face turned down against the rain, and he processed it with the speed of someone who has somewhere to be and whose eyes are already moving forward. He passed her. He drove perhaps 200 yards before he looked in the rearview mirror. She was still standing exactly where he had left her. The rain was not letting up. Daniel drove another 100 yards. He checked his watch. He thought about the folder on the passenger seat, the preparation notes, the $412 in his checking account, the note in his chest pocket in purple crayon. He thought about Rachel. He thought about how Rachel used to say that the moments that defined you were not the ones you planned for, but the ones you didn't plan for at all, the unexpected ones, the ones where you had 10 seconds to decide who you were. He pulled to the shoulder, put the car in reverse, and drove back. Her name was Sophia Bennett. He learned this when he pulled up alongside the Volvo and rolled down his window and called out through the rain. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" She turned to look at him. Late 30s, he guessed, though it was hard to tell. Brown hair plastered wet against her forehead. She was wearing a dark blazer over a silk blouse, both of them soaked through. Business clothes. She looked exhausted and cold, and beneath that, the particular calm of someone who has gotten used to managing situations on her own. "Flat tire," she said. "And my roadside service says 45 minutes. And I." She paused. Her jaw tightened. "Are you having contractions?" Daniel asked. A pause. "They started about 15 minutes ago. They're not, I don't think I'm in active labor, but they're yes." Daniel was out of his car before she finished the sentence. "Get in," he said. "I'll drive you to the hospital. I don't know you. I'm Daniel Carter." he said. He was already beside her. One hand offered palm up. I'm a single dad. I'm wearing my interview suit, and I am not going to leave a pregnant woman standing in the rain. Please, get in the car. She looked at him for a long moment. The rain came down. Then she took his hand. Street Mary Medical Center was 12 minutes from where they'd left the Volvo. Daniel drove fast, but carefully, both hands on the wheel, watching the road and watching Sophia in his peripheral vision. Watching the clock, Sophia sat in the passenger seat with her wet blazer in her lap and her eyes closed, breathing slowly through a contraction. When it passed, she opened her eyes and looked at the dashboard. You said interview suit, she said. Yes. Today? 9 o'clock. She checked the clock on the dash. It was 8:28. You won't make it, she said. It wasn't unkind, it was just an observation. I know. A pause. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. This is the right thing to do. She looked at him then. He kept his eyes on the road. You said you're a single father, she said after a moment. Lily. She's 7. Does her mother? She passed away 3 years ago. A silence. Another contraction moved through her. He watched her hands tighten on her blazer and release. When it passed, she said, I'm sorry. I know, he said. People always are. It's the right thing to say. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. What's the interview for? Senior analyst position. Infrastructure. It's the kind of job that changes things. School for Lily. A better apartment, maybe a yard someday. The kind of thing she doesn't have right now. What do you know about infrastructure systems? 8 years of it. Network architecture. System integration. Migration planning. My last company folded 8 months ago. This is the first real lead I've had since. Sophia looked out the windshield. What company was it? Your last one? Bridgewater Data. Mid-market firm, East Side. They didn't survive the merger season. She nodded slowly. He didn't know what that meant. He turned onto the hospital access road. We're here, he said. She exhaled. Then she said, Thank you, Daniel. She said it the way people say things when they mean them completely, without any of the packaging. He helped her out of the car and through the emergency entrance and stood at the admitting desk long enough to watch the nurses take her back through the double doors on a wheelchair. A doctor was already moving. Someone said the word dilated in a calm, technical voice. The doors swung shut. Daniel stood in the corridor for a moment, in his interview suit, rain drying into his collar. Then he checked his watch. It was 8:51. He ran back to his car. The North Star Systems lobby was all warm, light, and polished concrete, and the kind of carefully arranged greenery that announced money without having to say so. 2 security guards stood at a semicircular desk. A woman with a headset and an expression of measured efficiency sat behind a long reception counter. Daniel arrived at 9:17. He walked to the counter, still damp at the shoulders, tie slightly askew, the folder in his hand. I had a 9 o'clock interview. Infrastructure analyst. I had an emergency on the way. The receptionist looked at her screen. Her expression didn't change, which told him everything. Mr. Carter, she said. The interview panel completed their sessions at 9:15. They've moved on to their next obligation. I'm so sorry we tried to reach you. He had turned his phone to silent for the drive. He stood at the counter and didn't say anything for a moment. Around him, the lobby continued its purposeful morning motion, people with badges and coffee cups, the soft announcement of an elevator arrival, the mechanical sigh of the front doors opening for someone who belonged here. Is there any way? He started. I'm afraid not. The panel has already submitted their recommendation to HR. We can flag your application for future openings if you'd like. Yes, he said. Please do that. He walked back out into the rain. He sat in his car in the parking structure for 6 minutes. He didn't call anyone. There was no one to call. Really, Marcus would try to help and make things worse, and Mrs. Holloway would offer sympathy he didn't have the bandwidth for right now. He just sat, hands in his lap, and let the silence be what it was. He thought about the note in his pocket. Then he thought about Sophia, wherever she was right now, in a hospital room with monitors and nurses, and, if things had gone the way they'd looked like they were going, a baby arriving into the world. He had done the right thing. He believed that. He had done the right thing, and it had cost him something. And those two facts sat side by side and did not cancel each other out. He started the car and drove home to relieve Mrs. Holloway from the morning shift. That night, after Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the bills sorted into two piles. The ones due before the end of the month and the ones that could wait a week. He moved a few things around. He made a budget adjustment. He told himself that the other two applications were still pending. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. In the morning, he found a business card in the inside pocket of his jacket. Part 6. The card. It must have fallen out of her blazer when she'd taken it off in the car. Or she had put it there deliberately. He couldn't know which, and in the moment he found it, it didn't matter. He stood at the kitchen counter, coffee going cold beside him, and read it 3 times. Sophia Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, North Star Systems. There was a phone number, a direct line, not a main switchboard, and a personal email address. Daniel set the card on the counter and looked at it from a distance, as if it might mean something different from farther away. It didn't. The woman in the rain, the dark green Volvo, the wet blazer, the contractions. Mary Medical Center at 8:50 in the morning, while his interview panel at North Star Systems moved through their 9 o'clock appointments without him. The CEO of North Star Systems. He felt something complicated move through him, something that was not quite hope and not quite irony and not quite anything with a name. He picked up the card and put it in the drawer with his other important papers. He did not call the number. He did not send an email. He told himself it was because he didn't want to be the kind of person who helped someone and then immediately tried to extract something from it. He had been raised by a father who was very firm about the difference between a favor and an investment. And he wanted to believe he was that kind of person, the kind who did the right thing and let it stand on its own. But there was another reason, quieter and harder to admit. He was afraid. Afraid of what it would feel like to reach out and be met with a polite, professional silence. Afraid that the kindness she'd shown him in the car had been the transient warmth of an emergency real in the moment, forgotten by afternoon. He left the card in the drawer. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, his phone rang at 8:40. An unfamiliar number, Seattle area code. He answered it on the 2nd ring. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice, measured and professional. "This is Karen Walsh, Executive Assistant to Sophia Bennett at North Star Systems. Miss, Bennett would like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. Are you available this week?" He went on Thursday. He wore the same charcoal suit, freshly pressed, the same white shirt. He parked in the same parking structure and walked through the same lobby, past the same security desk and the same potted ferns. This time the receptionist looked up at him with recognition or something that looked like it and said, "Mr. Carter, Miss Bennett is expecting you." 43rd floor. The elevator was fast and quiet and had floor-to-ceiling glass on one side. From 43 stories up, Seattle spread itself out in every direction, the harbor to the west, the Cascades to the east, and the October sky above it all. Clear for the first time in a week. Karen Walsh met him at the elevator and walked him through a corridor that had the specific quality of being extremely expensive while trying to appear understated. Original paintings. Stone floors. The muted sound of a building full of intelligent people working. Sophia's office was at the corner. 2 walls of glass, a clean desk, 2 chairs, and a couch arranged for conversation. She was standing at the window when he came in. She looked different from how she had looked in the rain. She was dressed now in a charcoal pantsuit, hair down and dry, composed in the way that people who have run large organizations for a long time become composed, as if whatever is happening inside them has learned to stay quiet while the exterior does its work. But when she turned and saw him, something in that composure softened. "Daniel," she said, "thank you for coming." "Of course. Sit, please." He sat on the couch. She sat in the chair across from him. On the side table between them there was a framed photograph, a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket, red-faced and perfect, eyes screwed shut against the light. He nodded at it. "Healthy? 7 pounds, 4 ounces, she said. "That's a good name. My father's name." She looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she looked at him. They said another 30 minutes on the side of the road, and it might have been very different. Daniel nodded. He didn't say anything. "You knew who I was when you drove me," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. "I found your card afterward. It was in my jacket." She studied him for a moment. "But you didn't call." "No." "Why not?" He thought about it. "Because I didn't help you so I could get something out of it. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, and I didn't want to turn it into something else." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cloud moved past the glass and the office got brighter. "I called you," she said. "Not because you helped me. I want to be clear about that. I called you because I looked at your application afterward, the one from the interview you missed, and I read your file. And then I asked my infrastructure team to look at it, and they told me you were the strongest candidate they'd seen in 8 months of searching. I called you because you are qualified and because the position is still open." She paused. "The rest of it is just context," she said. She had read his file. She knew about Bridgewater Data, the layoff, the 8-month gap. She knew he'd held a senior network architecture role for 4 years before the company folded. She knew he had 2 professional certifications and 3 strong references, one of whom, his former manager at Bridgewater, had written a recommendation that used the phrase, "the most technically reliable person I have supervised in 20 years, in the second paragraph. She also knew, from what he'd told her in the car, about Lily, about Rachel, about the trajectory of a life that had been cut sideways and then rebuilt, slowly and carefully, the way you build anything that needs to last. "Tell me about the gap," she said. Not accusatorially, with the interest of someone who wants to understand. "I took 6 weeks at the beginning to be with Lily," he said. "She'd lost her mother, and I needed to be present for that. After that, I've been applying and freelancing when I could find it. I've been keeping current. I've been working through certification updates, studying the architecture shifts in the infrastructure space over the last 18 months. I'm not behind. I've just been unlucky. I can see that," she said. A pause. She picked up a folder from the side table. "All right. Do you regret it, stopping that morning?" He didn't hesitate. "No. Even knowing what it cost you? Even then. My daughter asked me what I wanted to be for her, not just what I wanted to be for myself. And the answer to that question has to be someone who stops, someone who turns around. If I hadn't done that, I would have gotten the job and spent the rest of my career knowing that I had driven past a woman in labor in a rainstorm because I needed to be on time." He paused. "That's not who I want to be." Sophia set the folder down. She was quiet for long enough that he began to wonder if he'd said something wrong. But when she looked up, her expression was not evaluative. It was, he thought, something more like recognition. "My father was like that," she said. "He was a high school shop teacher for 31 years in Spokane. He used to say that character was the thing you carried when everything else was stripped away, that a person's real resume wasn't the one on paper." She glanced at the photograph of Thomas. "I've been running this company for 7 years, and I've hired hundreds of people, and I've learned that you can teach technical skills, but you cannot teach that." She looked at him directly. "I'd like to offer you a position, Daniel, and it's not the analyst role you applied for. The title was Infrastructure Project Manager. It carried responsibility over a team of 7 analysts, 2 contract specialists, and a quarterly capital budget of $900,000. The salary was $116,000 annually, with a performance review at 6 months and a benefits package that included family medical coverage, paid parental leave, which made him smile despite himself a professional development stipend, and a 401k matched at 6%. That's significantly above the position I applied for, Daniel said. Yes. Why? Because the analyst position is a good job for someone who wants to do good technical work and come home at 5. And that's a legitimate and valuable thing to want. But the infrastructure division has needed a manager for almost a year, someone who can think systemically, manage people as well as systems, and make sound decisions when things go sideways. Your work history and your references tell me you can do that. And she paused for a moment. The way you made a decision under genuine pressure last week tells me something that a work history can't. Daniel looked at the folder in his hands. He was aware of the strangeness of the moment, sitting in a glass office 43 floors above the city. In the suit he'd worn to the interview he'd missed, being offered something larger than what he'd come looking for. He thought of the kitchen table, the 2 piles of bills, the $412. He thought of Lily asleep in the room down the hall, unknowing. I want to be transparent with you, he said. I haven't managed a team before, not formally. I've mentored junior colleagues, coordinated cross-functional projects, but I've never held a direct management title. I know, Sophia said. Your references mentioned the mentoring. And managing a team for the first time is a learned skill. There are people here who will help with that. What you cannot learn is good judgment, and I'm not worried about your judgment. He sat with it. He thought about Rachel, and the way she used to say that sometimes life doesn't offer you a door, it offers you a wall, and behind the wall is a door, and you have to go through the wall first. He thought he understood what she meant now in a way he hadn't when she was alive. Yes, he said. I'd like to accept. Sophia smiled. It changed her face considerably. Good. Karen will send you the formal offer letter this afternoon. We'd like you to start the 1st of November, if that works. It works? He said. She stood and extended her hand. He stood and took it. Welcome to North Star, Daniel. He nodded. He didn't trust himself to say much more. He took the elevator down 43 floors and walked through the lobby and out through the glass doors into the morning, which had turned, at some point while he was upstairs, clear and cold and brilliantly bright. The harbor glittered to the west, the mountains rose to the east, white-capped already, and the air smelled like the ocean and the specific, clean sharpness of an October day that has finally run out of rain. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Then he took out his phone and called Mrs. Holloway. Patricia, he said, when she answered. Well, of course you did, sweetheart, she said, as if it had never been in doubt. The first day of November was a Monday. Daniel Carter drove to work in the same car he'd been driving since Lily was 4, a 10-year-old Subaru with a heating system that worked on the driver's side and a dent in the rear quarter panel from a parking garage in Bellevue that he'd never gotten around to fixing. He pulled into the North Star parking structure at 7:50, took the elevator to 41, the infrastructure floor, and was shown to his new office by a facilities coordinator named Greg, who had a warm handshake and knew where all the good coffee was. It wasn't a large office. It had one window, a desk, a whiteboard, and a shelf that someone had left empty for him. He put his folder on the desk and his jacket on the back of the chair and stood at the window for a minute, looking out at the city. Then he went to find his team. There were the usual early difficulties. Managing people was different from managing systems. Systems didn't have complicated Tuesdays or difficulties with a particular colleague or a talent for passive resistance that expressed itself as an inability to send timely status updates. He made mistakes in the first weeks, moved too fast on 2 decisions he should have consulted on, and too slowly on a third one where speed had been required. He absorbed the feedback and adjusted. He liked the work. More than that, he was good at it. He brought the same quality of attention to his team that he brought to every system he'd ever worked on. Patient observation, honest assessment, a genuine interest in what each person was capable of. By the end of the second month, 2 of his analysts had told him directly that the division felt different, less reactive, more purposeful. He filed that away and said thank you and went back to work. Outside of work, things changed slowly, the way real changes usually do. The first rent payment he made from his new salary felt different from every payment before it. He didn't look at the number afterward the way he used to, that instinctive backward glance to make sure the account could bear it. He paid it, and it was paid, and that was all. In December, he moved them to a 2-bedroom apartment in a building that had a small fenced yard and a landlord who replaced things when they broke. Lily had a room of her own, with a window seat that she immediately claimed as her reading spot. She put a blanket on it and a small lamp and a stack of library books. And Daniel stood in the doorway of her new room and felt something release in his chest that had been held tight for a long time. Mrs. Holloway came for dinner the weekend they moved in. She brought wine and a casserole and stood in the kitchen with Lily, teaching her how to fold the napkins into triangles while Daniel cooked, and the apartment was full of sound voices and laughter and the smell of garlic and the particular warmth of a place beginning to become a home. He called Marcus that night after Lily was asleep. "I'm going to pay you back," Daniel said. "The 200. "I know you will," Marcus said. "I never worried about it." "I know you didn't. That's why I'm telling you." A pause on the line. Then Marcus said, "Yeah," Daniel said. She would have. Sophia returned from maternity leave in the second week of February. She stopped by the infrastructure floor on her first day back, doing what she called a circuit, working through the building floor by floor, reconnecting with her people. She knocked on Daniel's office door and stood in the frame with Thomas in a carrier strapped to her chest, the baby asleep against her, his small fist curled near her collarbone. "How's it going?" she asked. "Good," he said. "Really good, I think. Your infrastructure team is excellent. I've been mostly trying to stay out of their way and provide structure. That's frequently the right approach," she said. "How's parenthood? Round 2. She looked down at Thomas. A complicated expression moved across her face, something that contained exhaustion and wonder and a kind of love that didn't entirely have room for words. "Entirely different from running a company," she said. "In every way. Less controllable," he offered. She laughed. "Dramatically less controllable. He has opinions about everything and the ability to express only 2 of them." Thomas stirred at the sound of her laugh, rooted briefly against her shoulder, and went still again. "He looks like you," Daniel said. "My mother says he looks like my father." She shifted the carrier gently. "I think he looks like himself." That became, over the following months, the shape of a friendship, the kind that is not exactly planned, that emerges from the particular combination of shared experience and mutual respect, and the practical fact of proximity. They were colleagues first, and the friendship grew inside that, carefully, without either of them making too much of it. Sometimes she stopped by his office at the end of the day, and they talked through a problem she was working on, not asking for solutions, just thinking aloud while someone listened. Sometimes he asked her perspective on a team dynamic he was navigating, and she gave it the way she gave most things, directly and without unnecessary qualification. In April, on a Friday afternoon, he brought Lily to the office to pick up some materials he'd forgotten. It was late and most of the floor was empty. Sophia was still at her desk, she was often the last one, and Lily, who had no concept of restraint when faced with an interesting stranger, walked into Sophia's office and introduced herself with the full and unself-conscious confidence of an 8-year-old who believes the world is generally glad to meet her. Sophia, who had a baby at home and apparently a deep reserve of patience for children that Daniel hadn't known about, took Lily entirely seriously, asked her about the book she was carrying, and spent 15 minutes discussing the relative merits of the 2 main characters with her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In the elevator going down, Lily said, "I like her." "Good," Daniel said. "She listened to me. She's good at that." Lily thought about this. Then she said, "You should be friends with her." "I think I am," he said. On an afternoon in late October, a full year after the morning with the rain and the flat tire and the purple crayon note, Daniel Carter sat in the break room on 41 with a cup of coffee and a folder of quarterly projections, and he was not anxious. He was not calculating. He was simply working, in the unhurried way of someone who has enough to keep the lights on, enough to give his daughter what she needs, enough room in the day to be present for the things that matter. He thought about what Sophia had said to him once, in a brief, unguarded moment, when they'd been talking about the early days of her building the company. She had said, "The decisions that change your life are rarely the ones that look important at the time. They're the small ones, the ones where you have 10 seconds to decide and you do the right thing anyway, even when it costs you." He had thought about that often since. He thought about it now, in the break room, with his coffee going slightly cold and the city spread out beyond the window in the low, golden light of a late October afternoon. He thought about the rain, the shoulder of the highway, a woman standing beside a dark green car with her hand braced against the roof. He thought about what it had cost him. Then he thought about what he had now. The note was still in his jacket. He'd kept it through the moves and the months, a small piece of coloring book paper in purple crayon, creased into thirds. He carried it with him without quite being aware of it anymore. The way you carry things that have become part of the weight you don't notice because it's the right weight. "Good luck, Daddy. You can do it." She had been right. He hadn't gotten the job he'd been driving to. He'd gotten something else, something that had required him to go through the wall first, to pay the cost, to hold his principles in one hand and his need in the other, and choose the thing that was right even when it was the thing that hurt. And on the other side of that choice was this: a daughter with a window seat and a stack of library books, a team of people who trusted him, a friendship that had grown slowly and honestly from the particular soil of a hard thing survived, a city laid out in autumn light and work that mattered. And enough. He picked up his folder. He went back to work.